Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for this important session. My name is Lacey Stone, and I serve as the Chief Development Officer at USA for UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency. And I am so delighted to have the opportunity to moderate a timely and an essential discussion today. Last week, the world honored courage of people who have been forced to flee their home country to escape conflict or persecution on World Refugee Day. And while this annual event falls on June 20th each year, we show solidarity and shine a light on the rights, the needs, and the dreams of those forced to flee at USA for UNHCR. So I want to thank you for joining us today and for saying clearly and courageously that refugees are not alone and that we will not turn our back. And in addition to celebrating World Refugee Day in June, UNHCR also launched the flagship Global Trends Report. This annual report provides the most authoritative global data on refugees, asylum seekers, internally displaced and stateless people, as well as their main host countries of origin. I am excited today to be joined by two very special guests who I am thrilled to introduce to you. And together today, we're going to findings and trends that were revealed in this year's report, including the number by war at a shocking and decade high level, a bright spot being a pickup in voluntary refugee returns, notably to Syria and UNHCR's response. And then finally, we'll explore hope for the future and UNHCR Goodwill Ambassador Yusra Mardini. If you do have questions during today's discussion, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And if we don't have time to answer your question, the UNHCR team will follow up with you directly. So I'm going to start today by introducing Ewan Watson. Ewan is the head of global communications at UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, and Ewan is going to be sharing the key findings that were revealed in this year's global report. Because behind every statistic of people forced to flee, there is a human story of loss, resilience, and hope. And while returns in places like Syria have brought some hope, the situation remains, especially those in Sudan, Afghanistan, Ukraine, and Myanmar, where more than a third of all people are from. So Ewan, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. I know you've just returned from Syria, and I'll turn it over to you to provide us all with an overview of global force at a time when our system may be at a breaking point. Ewan, over to you.
Lacey, thank you so very much to you and to all of USA for UNHCR for organizing this webinar and for all your supporters for joining us, for finding time for us this afternoon. Thank you very much. And you're right, this is such a timely and important topic of conversation. And I want to just talk to you a little bit now through what is UNHCR's flagship report. And I'm just going to give you a few key findings that come out of that report that I think are particularly interesting. Lacey, you mentioned it, but the world is in an impossibly difficult place at the moment. There are not a lot of pockets of hope, but I really did see in Syria, I've just come out of there yesterday, I did see in Syria some of that fragile hope that we at UNHCR are trying to nourish, are trying to support. This photo here is of a young boy who we met at the border between Lebanon and Syria, who was in a bus with his family about to head home to his hometown. And I think it resonates in terms of just that sense of hope for a bright future, hopefully for that country. So I want to first start by talking through the global displacement trends. And what we do each year in June is issue our flagship report that really focuses in on data that we ourselves at UNHCR have, but also government data from around the world, looking at trends both in terms of refugees, people who are forced to leave their countries, but also internally displaced people, people who have to flee but remain within their country. those two groups in particular, looking at the numbers and the main trends around the world. And I wanted just to give you a snapshot of what those trends are telling us, and perhaps provide a little bit of an analysis there. So I think the first thing, Lacey, you pointed towards it, the numbers of forcibly displaced people are really shockingly high. If you see here, there's 122 million people worldwide that are displaced by war, by other types of violence, and by individual persecution for different reasons, perhaps because of their religion, or for their political views, or for other reasons. And so that is a huge amount of people. It's one person out of every 67, which I think brings it home in a slightly more, how to put it, accessible way, just how many people that relates to. It's basically the population of a country the size of Japan. So it's a staggeringly high statistic. And we're going to look at some of the trends associated with that. But perhaps just to acknowledge that the decision, and this is something that UNHCR knows because we speak to refugees, we speak to internally displaced people constantly around the world. So we try to understand the choices that those people have had to make in what are the most brutal and difficult moments of their lives. And it is never a straightforward choice to flee your home, because you are leaving behind in that moment everything that you hold dear, your sense of security, your job, your livelihood, in some cases, family members. So it's a brutally difficult choice. And really, it puts you at a crossroads between, on the one hand, the hope, the chance of survival, and on the other hand, the perils of staying behind in your hometown. And that is never easy. And of course, and we know this, even when people have made that very courageous, that difficult decision to flee their homes because they are forced to, the perils don't stop there. And in many cases, there are dangers along the path towards safety. So it's a huge, unacceptably high number that has kept going up over the last decade. So we've been doing this report now in UNHCR for many, many years. So we're in a position to see the trends as they run. And what I can say is that over the last decade, that number has doubled. So whereas in 2015, there were about 64 million people displaced, now there is 122, so that has doubled. However, what we also see is that the funding that goes towards helping people who have been forced to flee their homes is now back at 2015 levels. So we're faced with an almost impossible situation where the humanitarian response to people forced to flee is really at breaking point, because on the one hand, the needs are rising and keep on rising. But on the other hand, the funding that is coming in to support those people is simply not enough given those rising needs. So that is a reality that we're facing. And it's why that supporters like you are so important. Maybe if we could just move on to the next slide. Yeah, I wanted to just highlight 3 additional statistics. I won't try and overdo it with the statistics that I'm sharing with you today, but I thought it was interesting that you see 3 more, because I think it makes the picture more nuanced. So firstly, most refugees stay in the country that's next door to them. And that kind of makes sense when you understand, and we see this every day when we speak to refugees and people forced to flee, they basically, what they dream about is going back home again when it's safe. So it's only logical that you're going to try and stay, if it's safe and you are allowed to, in a country neighboring your own. So, in Ukraine, most people, at least initially, fled to Poland or fled to Moldova next door. You take the tragic situation in Sudan now. Most of the people displaced and having fled outside of Sudan by that war are in neighboring countries: South Sudan, Chad, Uganda, Ethiopia. So this is where I find it interesting, because I think there's a perception, certainly here in Europe where I am, that many people flee towards richer countries. Many people are trying to get to Europe. Now, in some cases, of course, that will be true, but in the majority of cases, people stay next door to their own country. And as that other statistic shows there, so 73% of refugees, so the vast majority really, are hosted by lower and middle income countries that themselves need some support. They don't necessarily have the schools, the healthcare facilities, the education structure that allows those refugees to find some sort of semblance of a new life. So that's why we at UNHCR attempt to help those host countries, because they really do need it. They don't necessarily have the funds to support the arrival of refugees following some sort of emergency that happens next door to them. And this last statistic I wanted to flag, which gives you a sense of that while these numbers are unacceptably high and they grow year on year, there are solutions to be found. And one of in fact, the solution that is what we all want for refugees is for them ultimately to be able to go home when it's safe to do so and rebuild their lives. And so that's this last box you're seeing on the right is good news. 9.8, nearly 10 million people returned home last year. Now, I do want to just quickly qualify that, because not all of those returns were under happy circumstances. So if you could imagine, let's take South Sudan for an example. Many people fled South Sudan in the past to go to Sudan, because in South Sudan too, unfortunately, there have been many wars and other violence that have driven people outside of the country. So many fled to Sudan. Now, over the last 2 years, with the war that broke out in Sudan, unfortunately, many of those South Sudanese populations have had to go back to South Sudan. So it wasn't necessarily because of their choice or because it's now safe in South Sudan. It's simply because, well, the country they sought safety in is now at war, so they had to. So there are a few situations like that where people have actually had to go home because of duress, under duress. But nonetheless, those people need support. They still find themselves in what might be an unfamiliar country after many years abroad, and they need support just to start trying to rebuild the pieces of their lives. And Syria is another, I would say, example of fragile hope. And I'm going to speak a little bit more about Syria in a minute. But just to say, there are solutions out there. One of them is going home. Another one is where countries accept some refugees to be resettled in their own country. So to move from perhaps right beside a war zone to somewhere safer. There are different solutions, but certainly returning home is the one that most refugees want, as you can imagine. All right, next slide, please. I think I talked through this, but maybe just to reiterate how astonishing that statistic is, really, that over 10 years, this number of displaced people has doubled. And I guess the main driver of that is four conflicts that have driven 1/3 of that 122 million to leave their homes. And those four conflicts are Sudan, Syria, Afghanistan, and Ukraine. So just those four wars alone have led a third of that 122 million people to flee. So it's really, when we say that it is primarily war that is driving people to flee their homes, it really is borne out by the statistics. And what makes this even more complicated is that, unfortunately, these days, we don't see a lot of wars being solved. It's become rare. So if you take, wars from the Democratic Republic of Congo to Myanmar to the others that I mentioned, they start, people flee, but then the political solution to find peace is not necessarily there. And therefore, those situations for refugees, for others displaced, just continue on, and they don't get resolved. People can't go home because there's not been the peace made. So this is where the number just keeps on growing, and it's really complicated. I think I mentioned the other point there about our funding gap, so I won't talk further about that. But of course, it puts humanitarian organizations like UNHCR in a very difficult position where we're forced to make very difficult choices ourselves about, well, where does our money go to? Who do we prioritize? And you can imagine, I'm going to give you a couple examples of the people I met in Syria now who really do need support. But it's very difficult for us with less resources to have to choose between people that will help. But of course, we're obliged to do that with this situation. Okay, let's move to the next slides. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about my experience in Syria and some of the work that UNHCR is doing through there. And of course, Yusra Mardini will speak later on, can give obviously a much more personal and compelling story. But I wanted nonetheless to share my sense of the country and what people were telling us and what they need. Based on the week that I spent there. So I was traveling there with the High Commissioner for Refugees, Filippo Grandi, and I was there for World Refugee Day. And one of the reasons we wanted to spend World Refugee Day in Syria was because it's one of the countries, one of the few countries where, which is not now producing refugees. It's where you can go to no longer be a refugee. So as a Syrian now, and so many people have decided to do this, they've decided to return to the country, which has just emerged after 14 years of conflict with the change of regime in December. And since December, about 600,000 refugees have decided to return home. And on top of that, you've got many people within Syria who were internally displaced within the country. About 7 million people were displaced out of their hometown to somewhere else in the country. And so out of those 7+ million, about 1.2 million have returned to their hometown since December. So it's a huge group of people that have decided to make that move and go home. And I was privileged, was lucky enough to see some of those family reunions that take place in those incredibly touching moments when people make the step to go home. So this picture you're seeing here was in a city called Dara, which is in the south of Syria. And this was a group of former refugees who were living in Jordan for many years, a neighboring country, who had come back to Syria and were going home. And so this is one of the moments of family reunion that I saw last week. So of course it's incredibly moving, and it's a powerful moment. And it's a moment of fundamentally of hope for rebuilding a future. But it's not an easy road. You can imagine that the country is devastated by conflict. Many of the housing infrastructure, schools, hospitals have been destroyed or are no longer functioning. So there's a real need to help those people as they start to build a fledgling new life in their home country. So I wanted just to show you this picture of a family being reunited, because I think there really is hope in the air that you see in Syria, despite the many challenges the country faces. There's hope, and what we at UNHCR are trying to do is to make sure that we are playing our part in trying to help those returnees start to rebuild a sustainable life there so that they can stay there. What we don't want to do is find ourselves in a situation where people simply cannot sustain themselves in their home country and then are forced again to leave because they just can't find housing that's not been destroyed or find a job. So we're playing our part, but it's true that this requires a bigger international effort beyond UNHCR to support. All right, next slide, please. Yeah, this photo that you see here was this young lady on the right, Samira. This was at the border crossing between Lebanon and Syria. This young lady, we met her really quite by accident. She was carrying a baby that she said was only a few weeks old in swaddling clothes there. And her husband, her little baby, they decided to come back to Syria. Now, they knew that their home was partially destroyed. They had brought a tent with them as part of the belongings that they brought back, and they said to us, "Look, we know it's going to be tough, but we want to restart. This is our future." So it was a powerful moment to that young family for us to meet them. So how does the UNHCR help families like Samira's? Well, firstly, one of the things we do, which is very important for people that don't necessarily have the means, is we help with transportation. So if you arrive at the border, or even if you are living in Jordan, say, as a refugee, if you decide to go home, we will help with transportation back to your hometown of yourself, your family, and your belongings. And that is really vital because that's quite an expensive endeavor otherwise to transport all your belongings, and people don't necessarily have that funds. So it may sound like a small thing, but it's not. That transportation cost is really essential to help people with. Another thing that we will do for people like Samira is help with documentation. So some people won't necessarily have their Syrian documents anymore. Maybe they've got documents from different countries. Maybe their baby is not necessarily officially registered with the Syrian authorities. Now, these things are important because the authorities need to register. That will also allow them to access certain services potentially. So we help with that support for refugees to make sure that they're registered and they have the right documentation so they can actually go into the country and be understood to have returned by the authorities. And another thing that we do, and again in that sort of legal domain, which is so important, is that you can imagine that people leave for many years, they've fled their homes because of war, they come back and they may not have the title deeds to their house anymore. Or maybe it's their house is now being used by another family because of the chaos of war. That's just what's happened. So there's a lot of quite complicated legal business to do for families to try and recover houses or property that they own, but they don't necessarily have document in their hand to prove that. So that is another piece of work which is so important for anyone trying to rebuild their life in a country. And it's something that we do systematically, and is so vital to somebody feeling like, okay, I'm safe here, I've got a place to stay, and I can start rebuilding my life. So those are just a couple of examples of how we help. Next slide, please. This is another. So if you're like that family I showed earlier on, just off the bus from Jordan, greeting your family members that you maybe haven't seen for 10 years, we will do a couple of things for you right on the spot. One of the things is that we will give you some basic relief assistance, blankets, cooking utensils, other things that you might need, so that you're able to just, get yourself up and running. There might be some food in there. Another thing that we might do is provide some essentially emergency financial aid, so that if you've just arrived, you're able to buy yourself some food or some whatever you might need to cover some rent, perhaps for a moment in time, so that you can set yourself up just in those initial moments where you're rebuilding your life again in what has become a country that you no longer know, really, after 14 or so years in exile. So some of this core assistance work remains essential, especially in those early moments when people are rebuilding. Next slide, please. I wanted to introduce you to Mohammed, who's the chap in the middle there, and this is our High Commissioner on the left, who's sampling one of Mohammed's falafels there. Mohammed, what you can't see is that he's actually, he had a terrible accident. He's lost his right arm. He had to have that amputated. He had to flee Aleppo, which is where this photograph was taken. He came back and needed support finding his feet. And what the UNHCR did was we provided him with a livelihood grant. And with that livelihood grant, Mohammed managed to set up a little falafel shop that I visited. He went from a situation of real financial fragility to a situation where he is more or less independent. He's got his own little business and he's moved forward. So it wasn't a huge amount of money, but it allowed him to spring forward positively and create this shop. So I just wanted to show you that as an indication that there are things that we can tangibly do to fundamentally change people's lives for the better. Next slide, please. Yeah, the last lady that I wanted to introduce you on the left here, hugging my colleague Celine, is Amina. Amina, this was in Daraa again. Amina is a proud mum, had to flee Daraa. You can see in the background there the pock marks of war on her house. We're helping her to rehabilitate the home that she's in with some shelter support. But what she was really adamant about is that she's trying to set up a bakery. She wants to start a bakery. She urged that she'd made some bread when we were there, and she urged us to try it. And she said, look, what I really, really need is a fridge. Can you guys help me with a fridge? Because that's going to get me started with my bakery. And I wanted to share that because that's not, you wouldn't have thought, probably coming into this webinar, that I would be talking to you about a fridge. But it's relatively little things that people are asking for that can really turn their lives around, because it allows them to build a little business for themselves and get started. So I just wanted to introduce you to Amina, and who is such a lovely and warm person. Let's go to the, I think, last slide. Yeah, those are some kids that we met at the border, coming back, I think, full of hope. And I wanted to just thank you for supporting UNHCR and standing in solidarity with refugees. I hope there that I've shown how tangible and concrete our support together with you can be, and how it doesn't require a huge amount to really make a difference in people's lives. So thank you so much for your support, and all the best. I will pass over to Lacey.
Thanks, Ewan. Thanks for sharing not just the statistics and some of the complexities, but thank you also for highlighting the personal stories that really demonstrate that even though each region, each crisis has its own challenges, there is this overarching theme of people trying to have the safest and the best life possible for their families, regardless of what they are facing. I want to just highlight the staggering figure you shared, 122.1 million forcibly displaced, representing a decade of year-on-year increases. And you highlighted conflict being that main driver of displacement, as well as the continued failure to stop the fighting. You had also mentioned the number of forcibly displaced has almost doubled over the last 10 years, but funding for UNHCR stands at roughly the same level as in 2015, amid some pretty brutal and ongoing cuts to humanitarian aid. So, Ewan, with that context, what would you say to someone who feels powerless when they see the rising displacement year after year?
Thank you, Lacey. Well, firstly, I would say I can understand. I can understand because it's such a huge figure. I think I would say two things. Firstly, would be I think it's important to focus in on what we as individuals can control, and unfortunately, it's not in most of our realms of possibility to make peace in Sudan or one of these other countries that are huge drivers of displacement. Um, so that's something that the wider community needs to work for, but that's not within our control. But there are things nonetheless that we can control in terms of supporting people who are ultimately the victims of this situation through no fault of their own. And I really did see that in Syria. I met so many people who had nothing to do with the politics, had nothing to do with the conflict, and yet were obliged just to uproot themselves and their family and flee. So I think really for me, it's let's try not to get lost in the statistic, because it's true. When you do that, you're just like, okay, well, it's hopeless, but it's not. It's not hopeless because you have a possibility to help a human being. Behind each of those statistics, there is somebody who is just looking for a little bit of help, and they don't necessarily want a handout. What they're looking for is to become really, certainly the people I met in Syria, to try and become independent again, to rebuild a little business. And there, with your contribution, you're helping that person achieve that independence, that sense of, okay, I've got a future. And in many cases, when people have just been forced out of their home, they are in need of urgent emergency assistance. They may need, an emergency shelter because they've arrived somewhere where they know no one and there's nothing for them. So there, I think you've got to focus in on the human being, because the statistic doesn't also tell you the story of what people are going through. And I think an expression of solidarity and empathy can be focusing on the individual and what you as an individual can do for others in this context.
Thank you so much, Ewan. Really appreciate your perspective here. And, you have just returned from Syria, which is one of the few contexts where we're seeing some positive movement. The fall of the government in December dramatically shifted the dynamics surrounding refugee returns to Syria. And we know that a growing number of refugees living in neighboring countries have already expressed a positive intention to return home, where nearly 2 million Syrians have been able to return home after over a decade uprooted. I know that we're expecting more to head home this summer following the end of the school year, but I think to put a finer point even on what you had shared, to be very clear, this will be tough and they will need a lot of help. everything needs to be reconstructed in Syria. There's no electricity available to most people. The services are very, very fragile, and security continues to be a challenge in many places. And so we really need international support to help rebuild homes, schools, and other vital infrastructure and services. And I really appreciate you sharing how UNHCR is supporting returning Syrians with everything from transportation home, house repairs, legal aid for the replacement of lost identity and property documents. This is just the beginning, but such important work. You had mentioned one of the urgent challenges facing the international community is to ensure that once people are returning to their communities, they have enough of the basics. And so really we're talking about shelter, electricity, water, sanitation, education, and work. And I believe I saw the High Commissioner wrap that up pretty nicely in one word, which is opportunity. They need an opportunity to imagine a future for themselves and their families in their country. And so while we know that it's going to be tough, I just want to acknowledge that we do have this window of hope that has been created among refugees that returning home may now be a possibility. And so with that, I'm going to transition us where I'm going to introduce somebody who truly embodies resilience and hope, and somebody who has become a powerful voice for forcibly displaced people worldwide. Olympic swimmer and Syrian refugee Yusra Mardini was appointed the youngest ever Goodwill ambassador for UNHCR in 2017 after fleeing the Syrian civil war with her sister in August of 2015. Yusra made the treacherous journey to Europe at just 17 years old, crossing the Aegean Sea from Turkey to Greece. But mid-crossing, the engine of the boat carrying Yusra, her sister, and 18 others stopped working. The sisters jumped into the water alongside two others and swam beside the boat for several hours, guiding the dinghy and saving the lives of everyone on board. Finding refuge in Germany, Yusra was then selected to compete as part of the inaugural refugee Olympic team at the 2016 Olympics in Rio de Janeiro, and then again in Tokyo 4 years later, where she became the proud flag bearer and spokesperson for the team at the 2020 Games. From there, Yusra went on to address world leaders at the UN General Assembly, meet the Pope, and receive several prestigious awards. She has since become a prominent speaker and sports advocate, also completing her studies at university in the USA. Yusra's incredible story is told in her memoir, Butterfly, From Refugee to Olympian, My Story of Rescue, Hope, and Triumph, and was also featured in Netflix's The Swimmers. In her role as a Goodwill ambassador, Yusra has shared her experience of forced migration to shed light on the realities faced by people across the globe. And Yusra's work underscores the message that refugees, when given the chance, can achieve remarkable success and make significant contributions to society. So, Yusra, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. As UN had shared, approximately 1/4 of the Syrian population has been forcibly displaced, making it one of the largest displacement crises globally. You recently had the opportunity to return to Syria, and so I'm hoping you can paint a picture for us of your own return after so many years away. What was it like seeing your family, especially your grandmother, during that time?
Thank you. Thank you so much for the introduction. And yeah, I thank you all for joining and for giving me and UNHCR the opportunity to, speak about refugees and about what they're going through and make a difference. So yeah, I returned to Syria 10 years after I left. I left at the age of 17 years old. And I lived in Germany for 8 years and then decided to move to the United States to study. And yeah, I took a semester off actually to focus on philanthropic work and working with UNHCR. And my first mission back to Syria was in March, where I met so many Syrian returnees. I saw my family again. I saw my grandma again after 10 years, which is like really incredible, all thanks to UNHCR and the work they do. And I went to community centers. I went to different cities. I went to Homs, Daraa, Sueda, and Damascus, and it was heartbreaking and inspiring at the same time. I think Syrians never lost hope, and they're always focusing on the positives. Biggest example is hopefully me. I always want to help refugees and see how we can help them, no matter where they are. And yeah, it was a really inspiring trip because even in the midst of everything happening and all the changes and kids like living in, have destroyed homes, which is definitely not safe, there was still hope, and there was still like their smiles and, the hope in their eyes. You can see their eyes lit, like they want to rebuild, they want to learn, they want to be a part of the society, they want to rebuild their country. And that gives me so much motivation to do my work.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Yusra. And in many interviews and posts, you've spoken about refugee children facing dangers that no child should ever know. And protection is really at the heart of UNHCR's work. And so I'm curious, from your perspective, what can and should be done to protect children who have been affected by displacement, especially in Syria and the region?
Yeah, this is a very important topic, if not the most important topic. I think it's very important to protect children from, they're crossing and also taking the journeys, that very dangerous journeys where their lives are being risked just like any other refugee. But instead of playing and, worrying about like having a Barbie or having a toy, they have to deal with war and everything that comes with it. So I think we can make it possible for refugee children to have safe passage. I think we need to give them opportunity to play sports, to get an education. For me personally, what made me who I am today and gave me the power to continue in life, knowing that I left as a child, I was 17 years old, is sports and education. So for me, it's to give opportunities to these refugees to continue their education, their sports, also protect them from child labor, also protect them from, early marriages for young girls. So I think this is a really, really important topic, and it should keep us awake at night, because I don't even have a children yet, and I'm worried, so imagine my parents when they had to let me go. So for me, my message is to definitely do our best as humans, and stand in solidarity with humanity, and protect every child on planet Earth.
Thank you, Yusra. I think that you spoke beautifully around the importance of child protection, and just really appreciate you emphasizing how crucial that is for society. We talked earlier, Ewan had mentioned restoring hope in Syria. You have mentioned restoring hope as well. We talked a little bit about restoring opportunity as well. And so, Yusra, from your perspective, what do refugees, including those returning home to Syria, what do they need the most right now to restore that hope, especially when it comes to finding work, rebuilding livelihoods, and restoring dignity?
Yeah, so many of the refugees that I met that returned to their destroyed homes. Some of them don't have homes at all to return to. Some of them have, just the ground of their home, and they're living in unprotected residence. Like they're living in places that are not actually safe to live in. To get back to the point of children, some children are learning about, what comes after war, that like if you see something around the building, like do not kick it, because this might be a bomb and you might lose your life. So this is a big topic in Syria, and I think it is the basic human rights. What Syrians need and want is safety, it's access to education, to work opportunities, to a medical health systems, and the situation is very difficult, because I just was shocked by the amount of sanctions that was placed on Syria, and what did that do to the people. Even though I was in touch with the people, but when I saw it with my own eyes, it was really heartbreaking to see that they couldn't even dream. They were just trying to survive. So for me, I think it's a responsibility for every Syrian who can, and everyone around the world, to stand with Syria and say, hey, we can rebuild this country, and we can contribute, and we can help change the lives of millions of children. I mean, I think there are more than 2 million children in Syria that don't have access to schools. I was talking to a girl, she was 13 years old, and this was in a community center that UNHCR supports, and that was in Homs. And it was a lovely conversation. And then I was like, how's school? And then she said, I don't go to school anymore. I quit. And I was like, what do you mean you quit? You're only 13 years old. And then she said, well, the closest school is 5 kilometers away, and there's no transport, and there are no places in the class anymore. So that was really heartbreaking for me to hear, because education is very important to, rebuilding their lives and get a chance at having a dignified life in the future. So I think there's a lot of work to be done, but I think UNHCR and in general the UN took the first steps of, being there on the ground and delivering no matter what happened, whether Assad regime was there or not. I think they delivered and they showed that their contribution is amazing. So yeah, it was really, really, really nice to see that in the midst of all the chaos, there was still hope. Yeah.
Thanks, Yusra. I want to go back to something you just shared. It sounds like, and you've spoken about this previously, but when you returned from Syria, you returned with some sadness and some anger, and you even asked yourself, how can I use my anger to actually make a difference? And so, for those on the call who might similarly be feeling sadness, anger, can you share some of the specific ways that you are turning that passion into action, perhaps through your partnerships with UNHCR or even through your own work?
Yeah, so I have this thing since I was very young. I always believe in the good no matter what happened in my life. I try to find the positive in the negative, if that makes sense. So for me, I was like, okay, I am studying all the way in the United States of America. I love my major. I study film. And one of the best schools in the country. And I saw what happened in my country. I was like, okay, the regime fell. It is really important for me to be there. I think people know the story, people know that I'm Syrian. So for me, it was like, okay, it's time to take a stand. It's time to dedicate this specific time. It's because it's very sensitive. It's the point where a lot of change can happen. So I decided to take a semester off, as I mentioned, and to go to Syria multiple times. I already went with UNHCR, as I said, visited multiple cities and met so many refugees. Today I had a mission here in Beirut in Lebanon, and I met so many refugees. And the heartbreaking thing is that these refugees, they want to return, but they're scared, right? They need to make sure that they're safe, they have a home, they can build a life in Syria before they return. And they can't do that without the support of UNHCR and people like me. So it is really important to highlight that, because it's the same for me. I built a whole life outside of Syria, but I love this country. It's my country, but I don't know if I can live there in safety. I don't know if I can build a life for my family and children. So that's a very, very tricky thing. So I think unless they know that there is safety, they won't return. And I think it's our duty, working with UNHCR to make them feel safe and make them feel welcomed back in Syria. And as of the work that I do with my own foundation, the Yusra Mardini Foundation focuses on education and sports. And this year we have a big project of hopefully either building a school, or we are, we're doing reconstruction to a few schools. And I am going on a medical mission in 2 weeks with SAMS, which is a Syrian American Doctor Society in Idlib, and meeting cancer patients. So, I'm everywhere. I'm trying to meet as many refugees as I can. I'm trying to contribute as much as I can. But, my role with UNHCR and being a Goodwill ambassador allowed me to be in touch with SAMS, to have my own foundation, to have the experience to reach where I am today. And it's just incredible. And I hope that everyone, learns what I learned with working with them.
Thank you, Yusra. We are so inspired by your story, your resilience, your advocacy. And if many of the participants are like me, we are now wondering, what can we do to help, even in small ways? What message would you share with everyone here about how each of us in our own capacity can contribute to supporting refugees and displaced people globally?
Yeah, there are so many ways to helping refugees. First, I think Always educate yourself about the situation, what's happening, the numbers. I think you can educate yourself through the UNHCR website. It's always updated. You mentioned earlier that 2 million Syrians already returned to Syria. That's amazing. You can donate. You can learn about the work that UNHCR does on the ground, whether that's in Syria, Lebanon, Jordan. I think is just that's the first step to knowing, okay, where am I donating my money? Where's this bit of it going? I think these are ways where everyone can contribute. And I always say this, like, if you meet a refugee, just be kind. The smallest act of kindness goes a long way, and just know that they don't have any other choice, and they're forced to leave their homes because of violence, because of politics, because of oppression. So always be kind.
Thank you for that. I have one last question for you, Yusra, and I'd also like to invite Ewan to come back and join our virtual room again because I have the same question for Ewan. But I'll start with you, Yusra. What gives you hope today, both personally and when you look at the future for refugees around the world?
What gives me hope is, everyone that works at UNHCR. As example, today, when I was on the mission in Beirut, I met two colleagues that work at UNHCR, and they're done. They lost their job, but they were there. They were still there with me. They were walking me step by step through everything that was going on in the community center, and they did it with passion, even though they lost their job. And this inspires me a lot and shows me that our planet has so much good in it. Like there are people like me, there are people, like Owen, there are people like everyone that works at UNHCR and many, many, many other incredible organizations. So to me, humanity gives me hope because I do believe in the good. And I do believe that justice will always be served, and that yeah, there's a lot of evil right now. There's a lot of things that we cannot control, but I think in these situations, we can do the best things on the planet. Speaking from experience, I thought at one point I didn't know what's gonna happen. I became a refugee. I wasn't okay with the word, and here I am today advocating for millions of refugees around the world. So never lose hope and believe in humanity for sure.
Thank you so much. Ewan, same question to you. What gives you hope right now?
Wow. Well, yeah, so many things. I want to start with maybe just um, individual acts of kindness that I think are really powerful. And Yusra really said, "Be kind," and I think that's so needed at the moment, and particularly in the context of people who've been forced to flee through no reason of their own, right? Through no fault of their own, if you will. I find that those individual acts of kindness where people, whether they work for UNHCR or like Yusra, have been inspired to give back. People on this call who want to support, who have basically said, you know what, I see all the things going wrong with the world, but I also want to be a little bit of a part of what can make it better, what can at least help. And that I find deeply inspiring. I also saw it with my own colleagues in Syria and how committed they are to helping, and not only just helping, but also, I guess, connecting. And maybe I showed a photo at the end there of my colleague Celine giving Amina a hug. It was really like there's a connection that is established, right? It's meaningful when people are driven to help each other and find ways to do that. So that is an endless source of hope. And those individual acts of kindness are deeply meaningful, even if they perhaps feel to the individual quite small. They're not. I think they add up to something much, much bigger.
Wow. I want to say a huge thank you to Yusra. Thank you for sharing your story with us. Ewan, thank you for shedding light on the latest trends and statistics from UNHCR. And thank you to everybody who has tuned in for this conversation. We at USA for UNHCR are especially thankful to this generous community that continues to support our work. As you know, you've joined us today as we're commemorating World Refugee Day. And so you're also expressing your own solidarity with people forced to flee and honoring their strength, resilience, and courage. But this is also a moment to sound an alarm on behalf of the 122.1 million people worldwide who have been uprooted from their homes. At this critical juncture, where brutal cuts to humanitarian aid are choking off assistance and threatening the lives of millions who desperately need help, it's vital that we reaffirm our solidarity with refugees, not just with words, but also with urgent action. The dedication and commitment of UNHCR is absolutely unwavering. We'll continue to deliver life-saving aid in the most vulnerable moments, just like we have for the past 75 years. When war or persecution forces people to flee their homes, UNHCR will provide life assistance, including food, water, shelter, medical care, and other urgent necessities. But we can't do it alone. Now more than ever, we must all stand with refugees to keep alive their hopes of a better future. This is really our chance to support and amplify refugee voices, whether it's through your advocacy, through giving generously, or through spreading awareness. We all have a role to play. And so I'd like to invite my colleague May to provide some links in the chat, and for each of you to go through these links to learn more about the situation in Syria, to dive deeper into the global trends, and to sign up to become a monthly donor. Well, you'll know that every single day you're helping to bring hope, comfort, and support to the individuals and families that need it most. I want to offer my sincere thank you to everybody again for joining us today. Thank you for being a valued supporter of USA for UNHCR. Thank you again to Yusra and Ewan. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.